right, Angel?
Ready?
You're gonna help us.
Nah, don't bet on it.
All right, well, question 4, day 2. What is the chiastic structure of the flood story in Genesis 6:9 to 9:23?
Starts with the covenant, ends with the covenant.
Okay, very good.
Nice. I like it.
Oh, I like
Progression
that.
between.
What was that?
Starts with a covenant, ends with a covenant.
What covenant?
What else?
What's covenant?
All right. Anybody else with a chiasm for that area?
I have starting with sin on the earth, then God's determination to destroy living things. The flood rises, the flood recedes. Then God determines to enter into a covenant, never again to destroy the earth. And then finally, sin meanders in Noah's time.
Wow, that's excellent. Very good.
I like it.
Very, very good.
This raised a quick question for me, and I know we're pressed for time, but how many people in the Bible does God establish a covenant with? Abraham, Noah, only a handful, isn't it?
Right.
Us.
Well, us as, I think part of this covenant with Noah is mankind as a whole, if you read it.
This one with Jacob too. Yeah.
Yeah, there's not a lot.
There's a few.
Right.
Yeah, my old, I don't have my old NIV study Bible, but they have a big full-page chart of all the covenants and what type of covenants they
Oh
are.
yeah, there's different types of covenants
Yeah.
also, right?
Yeah, different types. Yeah.
We can go over that next week actually, yeah, just as a footnote. Okay, question 5. What was the extent of the flood? Support your view. There's essentially 2 views.
Global destruction?
Global and local, universal or local. Who can defend either or prefer to express their belief? Chris?
I put global because it said that the water was above the mountaintops and every little living thing that moved on the earth perished.
Very good. Well, oh, go ahead, Tim.
Oh, no, I just, like, who's on top? Mount Ararat's not nearly as tall as Mount Everest, and yet it was only 20 feet above the top of Mount Ararat.
How do we know how tall Mount Ararat?
Because it exists today, it's in Turkey.
Isn't it changing that when mountains are going up all the time?
In geological time.
I mean, a lot of stuff happened during the flood, I mean, I think a lot of stuff.
Right. So what are you saying, Tim?
Well, I'd say, you know, I could think it could be either way, because depositions look like that. If there is geological time, then these mountains are different heights, and the water is only covering the lowlands, so that, you know, goes to one side. But
Which is like a question.
it could be the other way too. There are ways to account for that. You know, the philosopher Hume, when he was talking about precedent, we count on precedent for predicting things. Yet there's no way to prove the precedent. In anything, in science or anything. So you can't go back and say, well, this is the way it's happening now, so this is the way it happened then.
Right.
You really can't for sure know that. So it could be either way.
Okay. Scott? Yeah.
I'll take worldwide flood for $200, please. I think there's plenty of evidence worldwide to support the fact that, you know, there's seashores on mountaintops and things like that.
Right. The strata, yeah.
Yeah, the strata.
And actually too, for a local interpretation, the usage of the word earth could be also land, country. So you could read it, one could read it as it was more of a localized flood. However, from my mind, from a mechanical standpoint, it totally escapes me how a flood could be so contained in a region, because there's no essentially a bowl of mountains that would hold it in locally. So just from a mechanical standpoint, for me, actually, it's hard to envision, you know, what would keep the waters from rising.
It's 20 feet above the top.
Right, I don't know.
Well, the Bible also says that everything with the breath of life is gonna be killed.
Yeah.
But in defense of what Tim is saying as a viable viewpoint is, were there people living in South America, or was South America even there? Were people, you know, so maybe all living creatures were still localized.
Even like the rainforest, you don't think God created all those forests and stuff?
Well, there is a train of thought that says that's when all the land masses split up.
I was just gonna say that, yeah. The protocommons, yeah.
Right. I read that too, actually.
The water came from the fountains of the deep as well Christ, there could have been a tremendous upheaval.
Stuff happened.
Yeah, and there had been no rain prior to that.
Yeah, I read that too.
Ever?
That's the first rain.
The
So
text
that's
was-
what people didn't even know what rain was.
So, I think, for me personally, I believe in a universal flood. I mean, just mechanically, I don't see how that, it would just be a local thing, but, because again, birds can fly, so there could have been birds in
Not
South
for
America.
40 hours.
Yeah, not for, well, it was more than 40 days because it took how long for the
Yeah.
water to.
No, I'm saying though,
Yeah.
for everything moving up on the earth, it, you know, if you're thinking everything was fairly localized, birds can fly, so the birds could have been all throughout Europe at that point, across the land bridge, down in North America, there could have been all kinds of things.
Well, if you ever hike the Grand Canyon and you go down,
Yeah.
the strata that you see covers the whole continental US.
Yeah, and they're actually, and I subscribe to the universal also, cause people always say the Grand Canyon was carved over thousands of years ago, Colorado River digging, and could have just been the result of the flood. And actually, when you take, drive up the coast in Yosemite and stuff, you'll see areas in the mountains where you can specifically see the sediments and, you know, bones from all different types of sea creatures and such.
And then when you look at Mount St. Helens, there's devastation that happened in a few days.
In 48 hours, enough material was moved there to fill the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
And the Grand Canyon, the Colorado River leaving Colorado is at 3,500 feet. The north rim of the Grand Canyon is 9,000 feet.
9,000 feet, yeah.
How long
I
did that
actually,
happen?
interestingly enough, hiked the Grand Canyon twice, rim to rim in less than a day. I did south rim to north rim in less than 20, with the 80-pound pack, and then we, on a separate trip, did the exact opposite. It's really a great trip if you can do it, but really fun.
I've heard too
Yeah,
that
one
there
day.
is actually
Are you agreeing,
a
right?
rift, there's actually a rift all the way around the world that they believe that that's where the water came up from the ground and it just cracked. And then it came down from the, the
Firmament.
spot, right.
Very good. Okay, question 6. Are there ancient Mesopotamian parallels to the biblical flood?
Yes.
Yes.
Well,
Actually, it's interesting to point out that a lot of the early civilizations, including Greece and even the Native Americans, which is not as old, all have flood accounts, which is very, very interesting. So what are some of the parallels?
Gilgamesh epic and that guy that you kinda can't pronounce his name at all.
Right, that's fine.
Yeah, starts with
But
a U.
he was forewarned by a deity, right? He survived in a boat, with pairs of animals also, so there's a lot of similarity. Right, use birds to determine whether it was received or not. But what's the main difference between, say, the Gilgamesh epic and the Genesis account?
the Genesis account is judgment, and that one's not judgment.
Right, it was due to sin, and we've noted already that a lot of the religious systems of the day really had no moral compass built in, right? Everything was very capricious, and in fact, their account was the humans were making too much noise and the gods couldn't sleep. Hey, babe, did you turn on? Oh.
Oh, that was afterwards. Yeah, that was
So, but again, this clearly demonstrates how God is working through history and how the Jews actually honored that. So, okay, day 3, question 7. How does God apply the Imago Dei theme to homicide after the flood? Actually, let's read, can we read Genesis 9, 1 through 17? And who left off last time?
Yeah.
Okay. Genesis 9, 1 through 17.
Okay. Maybe we said. Okay. 1 through 17. Okay.
And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground, and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every living thing that lives shall be food for you. As I gave you the green plants, I gave you everything. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. And for your lifeblood I will require a reckoning. From every beast I will require it from man. From his fellow man I will require a reckoning for the life of man.
Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made man. As for you, be fruitful and increase in number, multiply on the earth and increase upon it.
Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be cut off by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth.
And God said, this is a covenant, this is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth, and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember and the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on the earth.
Okay.
God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth.
Very good. So how does God apply the Imago Dei theme to homicide?
Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth.
Created in his image. In fact, God says, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. Right, Ed? For in the image of God has God made man. So you're right.
So you also can see it as God gives life and God reserves the right to take life.
Yes.
It's not a man decision, it's a God decision. It's his sovereignty.
And that actually is the truth in the New Testament as well, isn't it?
Yep.
Yes.
What about where, I will surely demand an accounting, I will demand an accounting from every animal and from each man too, I will demand an accounting. The animals that shed man's blood?
Well, that's a good question. I'll have to research that to really answer that, unless anyone can jump in.
Which verse is that?
4.
I will demand an accounting from every animal and from each man too. So, I'll have to research that, yeah. Tim, any ideas?
This relates to Matthew 5, in that, when we're talking about the different kinds of covenant, generally, the covenant that God makes is he's king with vassals. The kings get to set what they're gonna do, what the vassals are gonna do, and what the punishment is when the vassals don't do it.
Right.
In the Noahic, covenant, he sets what he's gonna do, he's not going to destroy the earth, and so on and so forth. And then he sets some things for us to do, one of them is to initiate types of punishment. But what we see in the New Testament in Matthew 5 is that Jesus either confirms something from the Old Testament, he expands on something from the Old Testament, or he gives you new light. Something added, another piece of the covenant, which is the new covenant. So if you read in Matthew 5, say 38, it says, "You've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, do not resist evil person or slap you in the right cheek," and so on. So that, you know, you're gonna love your neighbor and hate your enemy, it is said, but I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And, it goes on like that, basically saying, you know, be like I am. You can't do anything that Jesus didn't do. And then he expands on the Old Testament covenant, which is right as king. He changed the covenant on our side, the vassal side.
Right.
So you can't say necessarily that this would in itself justify capital punishment. It is countermanded or expanded on in Matthew 5.
Right, no, I agree. Yes, and also though, I will demand an accounting from every animal. That's kind of odd, so I'll have to research that lesson. Any ideas on that, or? Yeah. Or like if a bear attacks a human.
Yeah, it's just kind of common sense, but I guess they know they're around.
It was God's judgment on Thomas, that was it.
Okay, Jared, you get to answer question 8.
Yeah, good.
What does God promise Noah and all living creatures after the flood? And then what is the significance of the rainbow? We already kind of talked about that.
Just that he won't destroy, you know, the earth by water and that the rainbow is a sign, you know, and in fact, he's saying, you will remind me that, you know, I'm not gonna do this, even though he's still saying that the inclination of their heart is evil.
Right. Very good.
Insight, quick.
Yes.
Check out what sign the gay community has adopted, right?
I don't know. Oh, the rainbow.
That's right.
Right.
Right?
You think that's on purpose?
Well, I think Satan did that way because it ruined.
Right.
It's the first sign of God's great mercy, right?
Oh, that's
Over
interesting. Yeah.
and now.
Have they said that to you? That's or you're. Just
No, it's just
observing?
what I noticed because it's a great big affront to God's
It's
covenant.
really interesting. I've seen the rainbow and on people's cars and stuff, so I know what that means. But I never made the connection.
So, say it again, why did they have the rainbow?
Well, I'm just saying, Satan's plan is now. I mean, how many of you feel comfortable wearing a rainbow now?
Yeah.
Right? You wear a rainbow, they automatically they stole God's covenant sign.
And they talk about the Rainbow Coalition, which again is the kind of the diminishing of sin, like everything's okay with God, right?
Everything's okay. There is no judgment anymore, right?
Right.
Tim, you
I have a question. Do you think that God created the mechanism of the rainbow for a symbol, or do you think that's part of his whole creation from the beginning, and these were the physiological things that happen with rain and water, and so on, and then he assigned a meaning to it for them?
well, this being essentially the first, there would not have been a rainbow prior.
But the mechanism for it existed in the universe. Right?
It does, because you know what it is, it's refracted light.
Yeah,
It's,
right.
it's like going through a prism and all the different wavelengths of light, and it shows the different colors. So it's just, it's a physical process.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many different things depending on, but supposedly there was the big water canopy that was all water atmosphere, so that's why rainbow was not physically possible before then, before all the rain, right, before all the rain came down, so something happened after the flood, something changed
Well,
that allowed a
the water is
rainbow.
in the atmosphere is what is reflecting the light.
It was too
So
much.
prior to
That's
that,
why I
there
thought-
might not have been, yeah.
Yeah, that's why I thought people had much longer lives then,
And dinosaurs are big lizards.
because they were able to live for thousands of years probably.
Okay, question 9. We talked about already, but let's just review it. How does the New Testament allude to the covenant of Noah? Question 9.
In 2 Peter 2:5, Peter uses Noah and the flood as an example of how God through Christ offers an end to their sin.
Very good. Anybody else?
You could could see Noah as a type or foreshadowing of Christ,
Yes.
because God mediates his mercy for sinful creation temporarily
Mhm.
in that moment in time,
Mhm.
and then we come to Christ where it's mediated for all time
Right.
for the chosen people of God.
Good job, Ed.
And we talked about the symbolism of baptism, symbolism of salvation. We talked about all that.
It's the same old story to a point.
Question 10, day 4. Did sin survive the flood? Was Noah a saint or a sinner, and a sinner at the same time?
Yes and yes.
Yes and yes.
Sin ontologically is not necessarily a thing that is alive or dead, but so I'm gonna say the short answer is yes.
Okay.
But
James, and actually James 2:13, it's really interesting that God always provides a way out. There's always grace. And James 2:13, which is another verse that I love, is that mercy triumphs over judgment. Judgment does not triumph over mercy. It's impossible. So it's a beautiful truism. Question 11, what was the nature of Ham's sin? And if Ham was the one who sinned, why is his son, Canaan, the one who is cursed?
Gossiped and publicized his name.
Right.
Noah's drunken behavior.
And actually, there are some other interpretations of that as well. Some more ugly than what's specifically stated. And I hesitated to bring them up because, again, they're just interpretations.
Let's hear. What are the other ones?
Well, there's another one where the use of the language at the time, when you say that you see someone's nakedness, was a euphemism for having relations.
Oh.
So, because if you read that story like, okay, so he saw his father and then went and gossiped about it or told his brothers, and wow, Canaan is cursed. And that was a reference to later down the road where the Israelites were able to oust the Canaanites, who were actually very sinful and actually were noted for being extremely sexually immoral also. So there was a definite reference. But saying someone's nakedness was a euphemism for relations. So if you put it in that context, it becomes a very ugly sin and very shameful, and to publicize it and etc. So anyway, I put that there as a footnote. It's just a usage of the language. But some scholars believe that it fills in some of the questions. Why would Canaan the son be the one cursed and not Ham?
Well, elsewhere in the Bible, sin is viewed as multi-generational. Exodus says that the iniquity of the fathers will be the
Yep.
sons through the third and the fourth generation.
Right? Why wasn't Ham cursed, though? Ed?
Because he had already received God's blessing.
Very good. Right. He's already blessed by God. Previous. So man cannot, if God blesses someone, man cannot undo that. So the next option would be to curse the son.
Yeah.
So God couldn't bless and curse the same person.
No.
I'm
no
saying
curses Canaan.
that Noah could not take away a blessing that God had given to somebody.
Yeah.
Didn't have the authority to do that. But he could. And one of the next questions is the nature of patriarchal blessings and curses. What is the nature of a patriarchal blessing or curse?
They're very powerful and they confer prophetic significance.
Yes. They also are an exercise of authority. So Noah, being the grandfather, would have that authority over Canaan, as an example. But not if it contramanded anything that God had done.
And that could be also a punishment on Ham, that his
That's
son
true
because
too.
of his
Oh.
consequences
Yeah,
of
of
his
course,
sin.
it would agree with the father,
You know,
of
that-
course.
That's proved out in Balaam's curse. He couldn't do it. He couldn't curse the Israelite people, right?
Right.
And,
So,
and in
it's
Jewish
all-
culture also, the legacy of a man was very important,
Yes.
critically important.
Yeah.
So that's why all through the Old Testament, you hear things, he was the son of so-and-so.
Right.
Because they were identified by the legacy of their lineage.
Right.
So that would be a huge
His
issue
legacy.
for him. His
So-
legacy was that.
Right. So for such a curse is extremely profound, right? And based on what we read, it seems like the punishment does not fit the crime.
Yeah.
So that's why I brought up the other aspect to it.
Makes sense.
And scholars, defend that viewpoint. So, okay, day 5. Woo, we're gonna get through the day.
I actually take it a little bit differently. You know, I take it that the father leads their sons, and their sons are gonna follow what their father does unless there's something else that counteracts that.
So Canaan would follow what his father did. Okay, yes. Because the Canaanites were later known as being extremely sexually immoral and promiscuous. So,
Sacrifice their children.
yeah, it does follow suit. Okay, day 5, question 13. How big is the world according to Moses, as it is represented in the Table of Nations, Genesis chapter 10? And the question is, does Moses know about India, China, and the American continents? Huh?
Trick question, right?
Big pardon?
Trick question, right?
70 nations.
So, what do you think?
Isn't that how big the world is? 70 nations?
70 nations.
70
Well, first of all,
nations?
Moses is not making any claim about the size of the world.
No, for one.
Yeah, he's just talking
That's
about.
what
What's the question here for?
He's saying where
I
the
agree with
territories,
Rachel.
where the
Okay.
clans, where the clans are inhabiting.
Rachel says, what's this question doing here anyway? And you know, I have to tell you, when I got to it, I was like, huh? So, yeah, Moses knew all about China. No, I'm kidding.
Well, since no one had been there to name it, it really could have existed as a landmass, but not under China as such, right?
Right.
Yeah.
All right, question 14. I'd like to read Genesis chapter 11, verse 1 to 19. And we're going to close talking about the Tower of Babel.
We're not doing 17, because I have no idea what the answer to that.
Let's see.
Revelation.
What's the official language?
I have an answer.
Oh, yeah, we have an answer for that too.
I have an
What are you
answer.
reading? Okay, good.
Genesis
I'll tell you what my
11,
answer is when we get there. Okay. Okay, where did we leave off for Genesis 11, 1 through
Everyone knows
19?
that that's the
Yeah, English. Who's next on the reading? Okay.
Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, behold, they are one people, and they have all one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. Go ahead.
And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth. They left off building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth.
Very good. So, who would like to explain or talk about what sin was actually committed?
Pride.
Pride. In what fashion was pride Was pride a factor?
Well, it was almost like Satan, I mean, we wanted to reach up to the heavens.
Is that independence from God?
Yes. Yes. Anyone else? One?
No, I just wondering, when the Babel Tower they talking, what's it compared to today's, tall building? How many stories they're talking about?
It's not.
Now they're building more than 100 stories, so.
No. Okay, that's why I asked these questions. That's a depiction of the actual translation of those verses is not reaches to the heavens, okay, which implies height. And for years, that's what I thought, that they were building a tower to reach to the heavens.
Yeah.
When in fact, it really more means the top of which is heaven. So, when you think about the ziggurat, there are also precursors to the Egyptian pyramids. They're step pyramids, which are similar to the ziggurats in that they're actually a series of steps that go up. And so it's interesting, like the pyramid, there's a step pyramid in Saqqara in Egypt that is a step pyramid. It's very similar to the type of pyramids that they're talking, well, I'm calling it a pyramid, but it essentially goes like this. And by no means do they attempt to reach the heavens, but they have a very specific purpose. The purpose is, and in this example, a little different in ancient Egyptian mythology, but you'll have a base which would represent the earth. Additional steps would represent the heavens, stars, the sun, and they might do it in order. So like you might have one level representing the sun, farther out, the stars, etc., or the moon, you know. But whose center, whose top is heaven, typically the top piece was a representation of the throne of their God, where they would actually place their God, their icon. So now the Tower of Babel becomes a massive construction project that specifically geared to replace God, right? That's where the pride comes in. That's where the arrogance comes in. So it was not an effort to reach heavens by this massive stairway. It was really an architectural representation of a world without God. And in fact, later, these similar structures were built. I think Nebuchadnezzar built one. Anyway, the step pyramids of Egypt, ancient Egypt, actually are similar, except they had a completely different mythology. It started with a tomb, which typically was underneath the earth, and you could only get to some of them by like maybe a corridor that's maybe 4 feet tall, and you have to bend and go down these hills, or go down a very steep ravine underneath the step pyramid, and in fact the main pyramids as well, they have the same structure, where they would bury the king, the pharaoh. There would be several chambers built in representing different aspects of the afterlife. They would also be buried with all the utensils and everything they would need in order to eat, work, do whatever. They would be buried with, I think they were called ubishi or something. They're little statues that represent workers. So these statues then would animate in the afterlife and do all your work for you. Again, it follows suit that we talked about. All the religions back then had a capricious view of their God, and viewed the entire cosmology in terms of what was they could see visibly. Therefore, I find it very uninspired, because it's just taking from what they can see and creating a theology around it. You did have various gods, little g, that were the gods of the underworld, and there's the river that flowed in the underworld where the sun would go after dark and float across and come up in the next day. But so for the Egyptians, it was a similar structure. Eventually they smoothed out the surfaces, and then you had the pyramids. They would cover them with polished limestone. They were spectacular to view in ancient times because they glistened white in a desolate, dingy desert, which typically was very dusty because of the winds, the breezes and stuff, and it kicks up all the dirt. But you had these white beacons. But anyway, similar concept. They were all representations of a worldview that did not include God. And in fact, the ziggurats typically had elements of astrology built into them as well. The ancient pyramids, in fact, are oriented in such a way to reflect movements of the stars and the planetary objects. So there was a correlation between astronomy, and usually that carried over to astrology. And we read, I think it was class 1, we discussed how God, there was a prohibition against the Jews, the Israelites, of magic and divination of any sort. And why did we talk, and we talked about why that might be, and who can recall why might God stand against magic and divination?
It's open the door for somebody to, right?
Yes, but even more than that, yes.
You're opening the door to spirit world and trying to make yourself a god.
Okay, you're halfway there.
I think it's all counterfeit miracles to emulate God.
Right. Yes, all of that's true. And
the thing is that, even magic today is to manipulate God, and God will not be manipulated. So that anything that purports to manipulate God and His creation in that way is against.
ultimately, yes, all that's true.
Things like the serpent, I will become like the Most High.
Okay, we're getting there.
Okay.
But yes, that's the direction. Ultimately, it goes way back to eating the forbidden fruit. What did we talk about eating that fruit?
I know what's right now.
Right. I don't accept what God has said.
Right, yeah.
I know better
Yeah.
than what's better for me.
Yeah.
Therefore, I'm going to exercise my own agency to take control of my own life. Ultimately, that is the root of all manner of evil to this day. And even today, metaphorically, you still are chewing on that piece of the forbidden fruit. Right? Even today. In every area of our lives that is not completely surrendered to God means you are holding back that amount from God. You are exercising your own self-agency in opposition to God's stated purpose and authority. So metaphorically, even today, we are still chewing on that bite. God's prohibition against divination applies even today. Anything that takes away from His glory and His authority and puts something else there is a form of idolatry. And we struggle with that every day ourselves, right? So, the step pyramids, the ziggurats, you even find the step pyramid structure in South America. And they actually did human sacrifices, and again, it goes to attempt, and I forget who said it, attempting to manipulate the world and the gods that be, little g, because the viewpoint was, very at the foundation, all these different systems, gods were capricious, there was no morality, therefore, they were, remember we talked, they were, thank you, immanence. They were a free-flowing aspect within creation. Therefore, you can manipulate that power by burning candles, saying incantation, etc., as opposed to God being transcendent. There's a definite line, a demarcation. There's God and there's us. So, If you think about it, these narratives really inform how we look at our lives even today. Do you see how God's truth is not encapsulated in relativity? It's not a function of our cultural sensitivities, which ebb and flow. Right now we're in a different cultural sensitivity with the rainbow people. And that has ebbed and flowed throughout history as well. There's been times when that's been greatly accepted, times when it's been greatly mocked. Again, you cannot hang your hat on anything cultural. That's why we seek to study God's Word, to develop a godly worldview. Once we're sealed in that ark, right, we're safe. So, anyway, I find the Babel story fascinating on every level. And we talked about it earlier. It's not just a scattering of languages. Languages are a byproduct of your mental constructs and how you think. Therefore, what naturally flows out of how you think is a culture. So by scattering the languages, you scatter the cultures. Okay? And think about that today. What if it happened today and all English speakers now were speaking different languages? I couldn't communicate with you, right? We couldn't be co-workers. I'd have to find a group of people that understood me and start a whole new way of living, wouldn't I? So. No. Anyway, so it was a brilliant but blasphemous attempt to usurp God. And that is the foundation of why it was such an ugly thing. It was prideful, arrogant, but beyond that, it was an exercise of man putting himself in God's place.
Interesting note in verse 7, the question was earlier on that it says, come let us go down there to confuse their mind. This Trinity being with it.
Right, yes. And doesn't God say when he's going to go, before he destroys Sodom and Gomorrah, he says let us go down there and see if what I'm hearing is actually going on. I forget exactly. Well, God knew. Again, it was the rhetorical thing. When he says to Adam, where are you? It's not as though he didn't know exactly where Adam was. It was rhetorical. Okay. So when he says, Ed was reading a verse about God's heart pounding when he regretted creating man. God doesn't have a physical heart that would pound. Again, Scripture is written to us for us to understand. So naturally, he would use language and analogies that we could easily grasp. So, question 15.
Just one other thing on Tower of Babel. I had heard a long time ago that part of it was that God had commanded man to go out and populate the earth.
Yes.
And they didn't want to leave that spot.
Right.
So that was another reason
Yes.
for
Yes, because necessarily you had to.
Yes.
Yes. Question 15, 16, 17, and then we'll be done. 15, what was the origin of cultural and linguistic diversity? We just basically talked about that, right? Also, I'd like to point out that when God did that, that created an incredible stumbling block to Satan, actually. Because now, it slowed the whole process down quite a bit. Question 16, what is the new
whole process
of sin, the yeast, building up? And,
So they had boundaries now.
yeah. So it reset Satan's work in a lot of ways. 16, what is the New Testament contrast to the Tower of Babel? Easy answer to that?
Pentecost.
Very good. Acts chapter 2. Yes.
Well, what I was thinking was kind of in Revelation when it was talking about all nations and languages and tongues before the throne. They're all united again as one.
Yes.
Also, Romans 10, 12, and 13, no distinction between believers, no Greeks, no Jews. And then John 17, 22, 23, he prays that they be one as we are one. So that it's coming back together again.
Yes.
What you're saying about the mental construct of culture, in some language. That works here.
And actually, think about it even further. See, I can do a whole other hour on the Bible story. But think about when the language comes together via the Holy Spirit,
Yes.
we're all thinking of like.
Yes, right.
And we're thinking as inspired by the Holy Spirit. So it's just a beautiful, poetic occurrence. And finally, the big question 17.
But doesn't it also say, I'm sorry, doesn't it also say that he changes the language and disperses the people to the ends of the earth, right?
Yes.
Isn't that where you took everybody and you put them on the different continents? Did I read that wrong?
I didn't read it that way. I read it as a natural effect of people groups and people nations moving. I don't think airlifted to South America or airlifted to North America, you know. But I don't think it's that way. Because in North America, you could have gotten here just walking across the land bridge. It doesn't exist now, but and then going down to South America. So I don't know. Because in chapter 10, actually, it specifies, as a precursor to what happened in chapter 11, it specifies a lot of the different nation groups and where they were going to different areas.
Table of Nations.
Yeah. So.
But it was just localized, right? When I read through the Table of
That's what I
Nations, it was just localized to that region.
As it was expanding
But
out.
how did it get to like South America?
But over time, people expanded into North America. They expanded into the Asian continents. You'd get to North America via the land bridge. You'd come down in South America. You know, I don't know. That's how I read it, though. Finally, the big question, 17. What is the official language of heaven? Steve! The official language of heaven.
Evangelism.
Who's going to answer that question?
Praise and worship.
Okay, my answer to that question was, huh? That goes along with what Rick saying. What?
Only God knows.
So I guess love.
Klingon's probably not a good answer.
If it's not English, then it's probably Klingon. Yeah, you're right.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Well, thank you. Scott, would you like to close this in prayer?
Oh, dear Heavenly Father, thanks for the stimulating discussion here tonight. I know it's hard to come on Sunday nights for most of us, and sometimes it's difficult to even get here, Lord. But thanks for everyone who got here tonight. I know we all get so much out of these things, Lord. We appreciate you being here and showing up with us and teaching us what you want us to learn, Lord. Thanks for Tim's dedication and his scholarship and knowledge that he shares with us, Lord, and leading the discussion. Lord, we're just so glad that you have these classes and we can learn more about you and study about your word. Thanks so much, and get us all home safely.